Welcome, everyone. This is episode 9 of Food for Thought. I am Michael Lieberman, food and beverage practice leader at Foa and Son Insurance Brokers. Today, we are covering social responsibility and sustainability, two topics that really need to be incorporated into any seafood companies or food companies' risk management protocols. To help navigate these topics, I am joined here today by a good friend, Richard Stavis. Richard, thank you so much for being my guest.
Hi, very nice to be here. Thank you, Michael.
Well, listen, I really thank you from the bottom of my heart, Richard, for taking the time to join us here today. You are such a well-known face in the seafood industry, and these are definitely topics that companies need to really focus on navigating. So to get your expertise, it's very much appreciated. So thank you. So some housekeeping notes. Richard and I, we recorded our discussion just the other day. We're going to get to that recording here shortly, but I would stress that everyone should stay tuned because Richard and I, we're going to come back to you live to go through a question and answer session. That Q&A session is going to be moderated by Patty Devine. Patty Devine, are you there just so we can get an audio check?
Hey, Michael, I'm here.
All right, Patty, thank you for all the work that you do to bring Food for Thought to light. Much appreciated. For those who have questions, please use the chat tool within Zoom. We are also going to be monitoring, let me get my words right, monitoring Facebook Live. So if you have any questions and you're viewing us on Facebook Live, you can enter your questions there. We'll be monitoring that as well. But for now, just sit back, relax, and enjoy episode 9 of Food for Thought. Food and beverage companies are operating in a world where everything is under the microscope. Issues such as social responsibility or sustainability are topics that are front and center. Today, I'll be diving into these topics in an effort to show companies how they can manage risk and drive change through value-based leadership. I'm Michael Lieberman, food and beverage practice leader at Foa and Son Insurance Brokers, and this is Food for Thought. Before we begin, I would like to thank Peter Handy and his team at Bristol Seafood for helping me arrange a gift for our guest. It has always been Food for Thought tradition to surprise our guest with a gift, something they will truly enjoy, and Bristol Seafood came through in a big way. You'll see more on the presentation of this gift a little bit later on during today's episode. To learn more about Bristol Seafood and their array of products, please visit them at bristolseafood.com. I would like to welcome and introduce my guest on Food for Thought. Richard Stavis, CEO of Stavis Consulting, is an internationally acknowledged seafood thought leader and innovator with over 35 years of experience in the seafood community. Functioning in executive, purchasing, sales, and sustainability roles, his experience has given him insight into harvesting, farming, processing, and product standards. Over the last decade, his primary focus has been understanding, advocating for and applying best practices in sustainability, traceability, and ensuring responsible labor practices within the seafood supply chain. Additional current roles include Sustainable Fisheries Partnerships Squid Supplier Roundtable Industry Chairperson, board member of Fishwise, and advisory committee member for the Seafood Alliance for Legality and Traceability. Richard, thank you so much for joining me here on Food for Thought.
I'm happy to be here. Thank you, Michael.
So let's jump right in. You are a well-known face and name in the seafood industry with many years in the business. And I have to imagine that your personal views on sustainability, on social responsibility, these are all things that have probably evolved over many years. I'd like to start off with somewhat of a loaded question, so I apologize. But I was wondering if you could share with us your arc of awareness surrounding these topics of social responsibility and sustainability. But as you bring us through your arc of awareness, just for the sake of our audience who may be at all different stages of understanding these topics, could you also define sustainability and social responsibility?
Absolutely. I mean, I can do that. I think every company has to define it for themselves as well, because there isn't really an off-the-shelf definition, and even more, these continue to evolve over time. Because, for example, for sustainability used to be just about whether there was going to be enough fish to pull out of the water next year. And then it expanded to be were the fish harvested the right way, in a way that didn't damage the rest of the environment. And then now things like social responsibility are even being bundled into sustainability. So it often is becoming, it becomes progressively more expansive. And you even look at things like, for example, when you're looking at Alaskan salmon, which is considered to be very sustainable, because there is a stocking program. You're even looking at people who are concerned about the genetic diversity and the fact that since there have hatcheries out there, whether these are the same salmon with the same genetic coding, and as was there before we started harvesting. So this question of whether something is sustainable is one that people can debate, and they can split the fine hairs of it. So, I tell people that you should have your own value system. You should have your own definition of sustainability, and then you should also rely on, outside certifications, outside rule sets, outside, outside metrics that you can use that you can use so that you are in compliance with customer expectations as well. So you're going to have your rule set, you're going to have your expectation, and then you're also going to say to your customers, what do you accept? Do you accept a Monterey Bay Seafood Watch Yellow? Do you accept green? Do you accept MSC certification? And once you've agreed, then you've got a black and white definition. Social responsibility, social performance is something that, again, that's evolving as well. And really, it's something that came into the fore, I would say, with the AP stories and a couple other stories about 7 or 8 years ago, when we all, in a horrifying fashion, became aware of the fact that there were abuses occurring on boats, Indonesian boats that were supplying raw material that Thai factories were using to process for fish that was coming to the U.S. Martha Mendoza, the Associated Press, did a report, and there were some very major and reputable companies that were implicated. And I say implicated, but that suggests complicity. But basically, the product that they were sourcing had been harvested by these vessels that were using forced labor. And so, social responsibility covers everything from factory conditions to forced labor, to labor rule sets, minimum age, minimum hours, et cetera, et cetera. It's the whole suite of things that really has to do with treating the people who help bring the food to market with respect and dignity.
That's
how I would look at it. And
that's very complex, especially when you think about the seafood supply chain. These are very, very complex issues for sure. And I appreciate the definitions or you walking us through those topics. But now for you personally, your history in the seafood industry, again, goes back to, of course, your last name, Stavis Seafood, very well-known company. And you now have endeavored onto this consulting business, Stavis Consulting. So let's get back to your arc of awareness as you have moved through the seafood industry in your own capacity.
Absolutely. I started going into Stavis Seafoods at the age of 6 when my dad brought me in on Saturday mornings, and I was stamping address tags that they would use through the week to put on the side of boxes before they went on trucks out to the Midwest and beyond. So it was part of my life for a very long time. And for a very long time, it was really all about getting fish into the plant, getting fish out of the plant, and making sure that the customers were taken care of. It was a surprise to me about 15 years ago or so when somebody who we knew nominated us for Massachusetts Family Business of the Year, and we were very honored. And we went through an interview process, and we went to the awards dinner. And at that point, we got to hear all of the other candidates and hear their stories. And that was when a light bulb moment went off. And what I learned is that that families, that companies, that people can use their professional life as a platform to do more. That it doesn't just need to be about the commercial aspect about it. It doesn't just need to be the most efficient way of pushing dollars through a business. You know, and again, the things that people are recognized for could be anything. They could be philanthropy. It could be anything. Doesn't need to be sustainability. Doesn't need to be social responsibility. You know, and when I started, the first things that I started getting involved in was the quality of life for the fishing communities in Gloucester, New Bedford, where you know, where the people who were fishing really didn't have, you know, you had money when you fished, you didn't have money when you didn't fish. There was no social network, no safety network for them. You know, and so that was when I first became aware of the fact that, you know, that this community, that this whole ecosystem of seafood had brought our family, generations at this point of our family, a good life, and that it was time to start looking at giving back. And so that's how we started. And after having done a little bit there, I went to the other owners. At that point, there were 4 of us, my sister and my 2 cousins, and I asked them, you know, because I was CEO of Stavis Seafoods at that time, and I said, can I have 20% of my time? I'll still do everything I'm doing. 20% of my time to spend on giving back, to spend on these community endeavors, to spend on these greater efforts. And that's what got the ball rolling. And then I went from there to learn about sustainability. And once I did, and once I started to speak to other seafood companies that were focused on this and became part of this larger organization, CPAC, which is an NGO, which is comprised of seafood companies. And once I got to meet other NGOs and became aware of other issues, I was off to the races.
So you mentioned, and thank you for all that. You mentioned, you know, these other companies that you started to talk to and getting involved in organizations like CPAC, great organization. Generally speaking, how have you felt the views and the expectations regarding companies' positions on sustainability and labor responsibility or social responsibility have evolved? You know, I know your insight on your personal journey, but do you, generally speaking, how are companies' positions evolving as time has gone on?
Well, I mean, I think it's all over the board, and I think it depends on who the companies are and who they serve. And in some instances, they're enlightened leaders, and it starts from within the company. In other instances, they're going in these directions as they're looking to serve their client base and their customer base. You know, CPAC is mostly comprised of companies that are selling white tablecloth restaurants, and the chefs in those restaurants are very focused on issues that have to do with sustainability and social responsibility. You know, they're on the leading edge, and so those companies are focused on the story of the seafood, the story of, you know, they're on the topics, they're on the issues, and speaking to those particular customers and clients, they need to give more, they need to show more, they need to show that they're on top of these topics, and these topics are important to them as well. So you know, chicken and the egg, their customers were interested in it, they learned about it, they became invested in it, and they, you know, this became very, very much a part of their DNA, of their company DNA. You know, we talk about retailers, companies that are publicly traded and companies that are accountable to the world at large, stakeholders in the community, whether they're NGOs, whether they're large investors, started asking questions, started identifying priorities, and they started holding these companies accountable. And as these companies started asking questions, then the suppliers to those retailers, the suppliers to all these companies, these publicly traded, you know, broadline companies like Cisco's, and all of these companies and the supply chain similarly needed to address these concerns. And I'm not trying to suggest that the companies would have continued to, you know, move along unconcerned, but it's sort of an evolution of an ecosystem. And so companies became invested as the customers became invested as well.
Now, Rich, do you think that companies are looking at social responsibility and they're looking at sustainability as part of their risk management? Do they look at these topics as tying into risk, or are they just checking the box? And again, I'm sure it can vary based on whoever you're talking to.
Well, I'm going to flip your question around. I'm going to say they should and they need to consider this to be part of their risk analysis. In terms of business continuity, if you look at your customer base and your client base, if you want to have those customers in 6 months, in a year, in 2 years, and 5 years, you need to be able to anticipate what they're going to be requiring for you to provide. And the thing is that as they become more sophisticated in their requirements, what they're going to be asking for are things that are going to take you years to develop. So if you wait until your customer asks you for a detailed social responsibility plan, for a detailed ESG, environmental social governance plan, if you wait for your customer to tell you, okay, as of next month, we're only buying things from you that are MSC certified. If you wait until your customer says that to you, for you to react and to meet those requirements, you're toast.
Yeah,
you're toast. You're not gonna be able to do it. So if you're not looking forward, if you're not looking prospectively, if you don't understand that's the direction things are going, then you're not planning for your business to be in business.
Yeah, I wholeheartedly agree with that. Similarly to a physical hazard, the potential for a fire at a warehouse, the potential for a natural catastrophe like a hurricane to impact your business and create some type of business interruption event. I do think companies need to look at these topics similarly. Right?
Absolutely.
Have to prepare for these types of scenarios. And if you're not prepared to address social responsibility, you're not prepared to address sustainability, when your customer base is either demanding or going to demand these things, you may actually have a business interruption situation on your hand. And this has nothing to do with insurance. And that was one of my main reasons for setting up this Food for Thought broadcast, was to talk not just about insurance, but to talk about food and beverage, seafood risk management.
Yeah.
Right? And this is a topic that I believe ties heavily right into that. So,
sure, but I mean, you can even take it into the legal risk and the insurance risk aspect of it as well, because you've got companies in California that have been sued.
Yeah.
Because of risk of labor abuse in the supply chain.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, what we're talking about today might not be legal risk, but you have risks. You have potential LACI violations. You have labor risk violations. There are things that if you're not doing your proper analysis right now, if you're not looking at it from this perspective, then there may very well be violations that you don't know.
When you think about the seafood supply chain, suppliers, importers, distributors, and ultimately it goes down to the end consumers. Let's talk about customers, right? You mentioned white tablecloth type customers. We also have supermarkets. In today's world, right? And we're in 2021, and who knows what's going to happen in the future. But what do customers expect of industry today?
I mean, some of what customers expect is realistic. Some of what they expect is not realistic. But frankly, when they're the ones with the power of the purchase order, they're going to get what they expect from somebody. And, what they expect is a rich amount of information at their fingertips, formatted in a way that meets their needs. And this is where I think we all need to do our job. many large customers have their own rules and some important requirements and their own templates, and so what you need to do as a customer is you need to look at the big, at the big standards. You need to look at MSC, which is a certification schema, or GSSI, if people haven't heard of that, that's the Global Seafood Sustainability Initiative, which is a benchmarking system which identifies other less well-known certification systems for, for equivalency to MSC or similar standards. ASC is an aquaculture standard, BAP, best aquaculture practices. There are others as well. There's Global Gap, which is more Europe focused. Understand what they are, understand what your customers are doing, and figure out whether your customers want chain of custody, because some of them want to know that product is from those fisheries, but don't necessarily need chain of custody on that. Also, some customers will want to know that product is ranked either green or yellow on the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch website.
Right.
And that's something that you can do through your own independent research. One of the reasons why I joined CPAC is because I really believe in change through engagement. It's great to celebrate a success. It's great to celebrate a fishery that is already certified as being sustainable. But there's nothing more powerful than becoming part of that change process. And when you say to the harvesters of a particular fishery that we're going to buy product from you, or we're only going to continue to buy product from you if you get together and you do an assessment, you identify your shortcomings, and you invest to improve it, that's a fishery improvement project. So there are some customers who will accept product that's produced within a FIP, a fishery improvement project, that has reached a certain level of performance, or an APE, which is an aquaculture improvement project. And I just love those because, again, we want to see more fisheries become sustainable. On social responsibility and other issues, historically, for the last 20 years, I would say social responsibility audits for key vendors is what people have done. That tool that's a challenge. It's a challenging thing because what happens is that somebody shows up at a plant and asks a lot of questions and looks around. And problem with an audit is, well, sure, you're great that day, but what happens the rest of the days? And the problem is also an audit can't necessarily see what's going on in a vessel. So audits have their place. They certainly are part of your due diligence, but they can't be everything. But there are other tools that are being developed. There are vessel standards that are being developed. And there are, and also you've got sites like fisheryprogress.org is building social performance expectations into their standard, as is MSC. Part of what I mentioned to you before is that there's a convergence that's going on right now. That sustainable, social performance is becoming part of a sustainability standard. And
now Rick,
yeah.
What's really pushing this though? Is it the customers, or is it the ultimate end users? Because I have noticed personally, there's a tremendous amount of change that's being, let's just say, for lack of a better words, demanded by millennials onward from a consumer standpoint, right? Do you feel like that's the consumer base that's really pushing for these changes and the retailers are listening? What's your thoughts on that?
Well, I'm glad that you identified it. I think that there's a couple things that we need to focus on. First of all, there are NGOs that I think are doing a great job of framing the issues and identifying what we need to focus on. Because, we can all be very concerned about these issues and the vulnerabilities of people, but you really can't tackle a problem until you can identify it and until you can start, figuring out ways to address it. Like the whole question of how do you identify what's going on at sea? These are major issues that we need to find ways to address. We need to find tools. We need to find standards. I've just recently cycled off. I was the industry chairperson of the Sustainable Fishery Partnerships Global Squid Supplier Roundtable, and I piloted a squid sourcing IUU, illegal, unregulated, unreported sourcing prevention working group. And what we're doing is we're getting together all of the tools that exist to be able to go to our suppliers and say, you can't buy this raw material, you can't buy this raw material. So I mean, so again, part of what's going on is at the source level, and it's at the NGL level, where people are first of all creating, identifying the problem, identifying, control points and ways that we can actually tackle the problem. But then the other thing, and this is, I mean, I have a 22 and a 23-year-old, and I look at how they make decisions on everything. What they eat, what they wear, where they go. I mean, everything, every step they take in this world. And they are the most researched, the most knowledgeable, the most connected people, the most connected generation that has ever existed. And yeah, they do. They know. I mean, my daughter is a vegan, and she decided at the age of 16 to become a vegan based upon water use. Based upon how the load on the planet, that her food consumption had. And I look at, the decisions that my son makes about the food that he would eat, the things that he would buy. They know which factories are producing what clothing and what the conditions are there and what they would and wouldn't buy and why. For me, I look at the supermarket ad and I see who's got London Broil on sale the cheapest. And that's, I don't know if that's my generation, but that's certainly me. For them, sometimes I cringe at what they will pay for some of the things they buy, but because they won't consider a product unless it meets their criteria, unless it meets their value system. And so values-based, we live in a values-based world. They live in values-based world, and they want to buy products from companies whose value system align with their own, or whose value system at least are acceptable to their sensibilities. And when we were talking earlier about companies, about companies that aren't anticipating their customers' requirements in terms of sustainability, this is even more so. If companies aren't anticipating that this customer base, that this consumer base is ultimately going to be making all the buying decisions, same thing. You're going to become obsolete.
Well, Rich, let's take a break from the questions real quick. You mentioned that your daughter's a vegan. I know that you're not. You and I have had over the years some opportunities to dine together, and I know that you're a big fan of scallops. So in good old food for thought fashion, one of our traditions is to provide our guests with a gift. And knowing that you are a big fan of scallops, I know it's something that you would enjoy. I wanted to reach out to Peter Handy and his team at Bristol Seafood. And I know that you recently received a surprise package from Bristol of these scallops. And for the sake of our Food for Thought episode today, what I would like to do is actually break right now and go to some footage of not only you receiving those scallops, but I'd also like to break to a video message from Peter Handy of Bristol Seafood.
Well, here I am. I've got my package. I've been told this is a gift from Foe and Sons, and this is going to be an example of delicious and sustainable seafood. And here we are. Local, sustainable sea scallops. I can't wait to try them. Thank you. I'm going to be cooking my gift, the scallops that I got from Fowen & Sons and from Bristol Seafoods. Again, these scallops are domestic. They're from Maine, and they are untreated scallops. They are fair trade certified, and they are from a certified sustainable fishery. Just to show you guys quickly, again, untreated scallops have it all over the treated scallops that you can get on the marketplace, and what you're most likely to get if you're not asking. The way that you can tell if scallops are untreated as opposed to treated, just a couple of quick easy ways. First of all, if you look at them, if they're not glowing in the dark, if they're not shining too much, then that's always a good sign. Secondly, if you notice, the colors are not all the same. They're not bleached out, they're not white, they're not uniform. And third, a nice way to look is there's a adductor muscle here. That muscle is what keeps the scallop shell closed on the scallop. When you soak the scallop, what ends up happening is that hinge muscle actually falls off of the scallop. So if you see scallops with this muscle firmly attached still, you probably have a scallop that is minimally processed or that isn't processed at all. So these are the scallops that we're going to use. And I'm just going to do these in a relatively simple preparation. I'm going to saute them in olive oil, and then I'm going to be putting with some garlic and a little bit of onion, and then I'm going to be putting some tomato, some lemon, and then I'm going to be doing some mashed potatoes with some butter and milk. And that's all I'm going to be doing. Chives on top of everything just to make it look nice and taste nice. And I'm going to be enjoying a wonderful meal. I'll show you all a picture of it in a couple of minutes when I'm done. Thank you. Well, the scallops are prepared, and this is what they look like. Looking forward to this meal. It's going to be delicious. Thank you again.
Hey, I'm Peter Handy, President and CEO at Bristol Seafood in Portland, Maine, and I'm excited today to be able to tell you thank you for everything you've done, Rich. Rich Stavis, let me think. I met you for the first time at an NFI meeting back when I'd only been in the business for about a year. And I remember going up to you, having all sorts of seafood questions and how welcoming you were. And from there, I've just learned a ton from you, right? Whether it's committees we've served on, dinners or meals we've shared, all the way down to, frankly, the way you parent. So thanks for everything you've taught us. I sent you some MSC certified fair trade U.S. scallops. I hope you enjoy them. And thanks for everything you've done for me, for the industry at large, and for seafood consumers everywhere. Take care.
So Rich, I hope it looked like you enjoyed the scallops.
Absolutely.
I hope it was.
Fantastic.
I hope it was a nice surprise for you.
Fantastic. They are one of my favorites, and they were fantastic. I want to, Peter's one of my favorite people, and to not only get scallops, but to get them from him was fantastic. Peter, if you're seeing this, thank you for your kind words, and thank you for your quality product. And Michael, you couldn't have made a better choice when we talk about sustainability and social responsibility. This particular product, it's local, so the carbon footprint is low. It is sustainable. It's from an MSC certified fishery. So even if it's not chain of custody, it is a highly sustainable product. And on top of that, this particular product is certified fair trade, which means that the people who have harvested this product are treated well and are getting an economic benefit as a result of being part of this program. So it checks all the boxes, and it's delicious to boot. So thank you so much.
No, you're welcome, and thanks to Peter and his team at Bristol. Yeah, it was a great surprise, great gift for you, and 110% on topic. So it was a fantastic way to end this episode. But how I really want to end this episode is to put you back on the spot one last time. I want to dig in a little bit on the whole concept of change, right? I mean, you may have companies today that are just saying, my company is what my company is. But Rich, I know in talking to you, it looks like you have a guest there who's coming to join you.
We're talking about the future, right?
There we go. Say hello to the world. Everyone's watching.
This is the future.
That is
talk about my 22 and my 23-year-old, but this is my 5-year-old. Sadie, look at the camera.
You can stay there on Daddy's lap as he answers this last question. There's no problem with that. But Rich, with your 5-year-old there in your arms, you know, what would you say to the seafood or just food company executives that have the mindset of my company is what my company is? Where did they start, right? Is it more a matter of how you change versus what you change? What are your suggestions to those listening right now?
I mean, look, I think what's important to keep in mind is that the list is huge and it can be overwhelming. And, you know, again, every journey starts with a single step. I think you need to look at process. And I think you need to look at what process you're going to take, and you need to look at who you're going to include in your process. You know, I started this consultancy really for this very reason, because change is hard. You know, I went through this in my own company. You know, people in your company work very hard to get to where they are, and they got there using tools that they developed, and they found people and colleagues and suppliers who they trust. And when you're changing, you're putting everything there at risk. You're going from a person in a place of knowledge to a person in a place of ignorance. You're going from knowing suppliers to not knowing suppliers. You're going from having sales success to having sales uncertainties. All of these things are extraordinarily scary. So, you know, I always, you know, I found, you know, when I first started the process of trying to drive change through my company, to be honest, I could have been a bit more humble in this, because I thought I have some great ideas and I tried to implement them from the top down. And I got tremendous resistance. And the resistance wasn't because people were saying, I hate you, I don't want to do what you're doing. It was more people who were like, you're not where I am. You're not doing what I'm doing. You haven't lived this, even though I had, and you aren't living this today. So, I mean, you know, what I would really suggest is that somebody who's in that role, first identify the playing field. Identify the things they need to be looking at. Is it sustainability? Is it diversity and equity? Is it carbon footprint? Is it social performance? You know, identify everything that you need to address on some level. Then identify where you want to focus. And then once you have, figure out who you want to be part of your solution, and then work your way through to a process. You know, I've got, you know, a workshop process where you can bring people in, you know, who are stakeholders in your company, and they can become part of an iterative process where they can become part of the solution, part of the ideation process. And then once they become invested in it. And now it's not like you're imposing something from outside. It's not something alien. It's not something scary, and it's not something that doesn't make sense to them. You know, but where people often will fail is they get to that point and they've created this statement, they've created this rule set, and they think, success, I'm done. But the truth is, at that point, you're not even halfway there. Because now what you need to do is now you need to figure out how you propagate it through your company. You need to figure out how it works real world. You know, for example, if you're looking at a buyer in your company, you got to identify, what does this mean with the products they buy? Are they going to be able to buy all the same products? Do some of those products have to change? What does that mean to the you know, yeah, how are they being compensated? Are they being compensated by the dollars profit, by the dollars sales? Are those going to go down if you're discontinuing some products? You know, how do you make sure that they don't get less money as a result of this? Are they going to get incentivized? You know, if their products become more sustainable by 10%, are you going to celebrate it? You know, so you've got to rework the incentive. You got to create training. You got to rework your incentivization. You've got to have open channels of communication so everybody talks about when they stumble. You got to be prepared to course correct along the way, because you know, the solutions you have today you've lived in, and you've adjusted them bit by bit along the way. If you try to create something from whole cloth, and then you try to say, this is how we're going to live it, period, it's going to be horrible. You know, you're going to be in there in 3 weeks and you're going to say, this isn't really working. I got to change this. I got to change that. And then you also have to create what I would call a flight plan. You know, at Stavis, we had vendors who we were working with for 50 years. You know, if that vendor isn't at the pinnacle of sustainability performance today, am I going to say to them goodbye and go to this guy down the street who, you know, started his business on the premises of sustainability? Or am I going to go to this vendor and say, let's talk about the issues and let's talk about, you know, performance change over a timetable. Let's talk about you moving along with us and getting to a sustainable place. You know, and these are the decisions that, you know, these are decisions companies are going to make. In some cases, you might find that some vendors are just doing things that you're never going to be able to support. Or you might find vendors who have no interest in changing what they're doing. In other instances, you might be very happy that vendors want to come along with you on this path, and you might want to work with them and see that change. Because again, as I said, I find it much more impactful if you can bring others along and you can change a whole system than if you just swap out pieces so that the things that you're carrying are sustainable, but the other players are still there doing unsustainable things. So, you know, I mean, and you know, once you bring all of this into play, once you bring the training into play, once you look at your incentivization, once you have your feedback, once you celebrate your successes, once you make your course corrections, you know, and once you're looking at all of your partners and you figure out how you're going to bring as many of them along as you can, then what you need to start doing is you need to figure out how are you going to communicate this to the outside world, and how are you going to put time delineated progress goals out there so that the outside world knows that you're not just putting a slogan on a billboard, you mean business, and you're going to change. So, you know, that's a lot, but I mean, that's what it is. And the thing is that when you do all those pieces a bit at a time, it's more doable than you might think.
Well, Richard, hopefully through our discussion today, you've created some clarity to those who maybe felt a little bit overwhelmed with all of this, and how to you know, create positive change within their organizations. And I know for many years, you know, with your time at Stavis Seafoods, you were always accessible to your peers, you know, outside of Stavis. You know, you always were willing to help the industry get better. It wasn't just about Stavis, it was about the industry as a whole. But I do know that the industry, the seafood industry, is excited that they now have access to you and your expertise through your consultancy business. And I just want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for the time that you've spent here on Food for Thought and preparing for this episode. So thank you. It was a pleasure to have you as my guest, and you've always been a great friend.
Thank you, Michael, and I feel the same about yourself. Thank you for the opportunity. And to anybody who's watching this, please reach out to me. You can find me on LinkedIn very easily, and my email address, richardstavis@gmail.com. I'm more than happy to have a conversation with anybody. You know, it's not just about the consulting. I'm happy to help anybody be on their path. So thank you so much.
And I know you mean that. So for now, signing off. Thank you everyone for joining. Please stay tuned for our live Q&A. But thank you for watching this episode of Food for Thought. And Richard, thank you.
Take care.
Thanks to all for joining us here on Food for Thought. Much appreciation to my guest, Richard Stavis. And thank you to Bristol Seafood for helping us provide a special gift for our guest. To all of our viewers, please check out Bristol Seafood by visiting their website at bristolseafood.com. And finally, thank you to all of our Foe and Son valued clients for allowing us to serve your risk management and your insurance needs. It's our honor to play a role in your food and beverage journey and your success. I'll see you next time on Food for Thought. All right, fantastic. So we have our live Q&A session that we'll get to right now. We have about 10 to 15 minutes before we're going to wrap everything up. So at this point, again, Richard, thank you so much. Bristol Seafood, Peter Handy, thank you if you are watching. Much appreciated for how you contributed to this episode. Patty Devine, I know you've been monitoring any questions that may have come through, both here via Zoom and on Facebook Live. How are we looking?
We're looking good, Michael. So the first question we have is around kind of, well, let me just read it. In the seafood industry, industry-wide sustainability efforts, in addition to individual sustainability efforts, can get derailed by false general claims. This most recently occurred with the documentary Seaspiracy. What is your advice for owners of companies when it comes to handling this type of bad publicity?
Oh,
So,
gee,
Richard, jump in there. I had a feeling we were going to get a question related to Seaspiracy. So yeah, when there's a negative media event like Seaspiracy that may have some half truths in there, and you have a seafood company that's really trying to do all the right things.
so I
how do you
mean,
respond to that?
it's a really good question, and I'm lucky that I had somebody when I was at Stavis Seafoods, who was my VP of marketing. His name was Michael Lynch. He's since moved on. But what he explained to me was that what you do is you just wait for the media cycle to pass. You don't give it any more air, because the truth is that every one of the major points that were put there can be debated. They can all be, there were many inaccuracies, and there is also a lot of, I mean, there are a lot of ways that you can identify the problems with a documentary like Seaspiracy. The first one is that it wasn't really a documentary; it was a position piece. And it started with a premise, and everything went from that premise. And the premise was you shouldn't be eating seafood, and everything that they did was they showed everything damning as a result to try to convince you that. And you could say, okay, well, I can show you 100 good salmon farms for the one that you show that's not good. You can say that what you find in the dumpster there isn't what you're going to find in most salmon places. You can say, well, those whales are not what you think of when you're thinking of large, intelligent whales, and you can say they're abundant. You can say that was ambush journalism. I mean, there are a million things that you can say, but the problem is you need to be doing all of this rebuttal. And rebuttal. The only way you can do rebuttal is by bringing up the issues that were brought up in that documentary, which, quite frankly, doesn't really deserve the airtime that it got.
Gotcha.
And you end up looking, and I'm going to date myself, but you end up looking like Richard Nixon saying, "I am not a crook."
Right.
So what you need to do, and what we don't do enough of is you need to generate good news stories. And through the good news stories, you need to get more airtime than the bad news stories. That was something that NFI, National Fisheries Institute, had done a number of years ago. They were annually trying to figure out what percentage of the news stories that were out there were good news versus bad news. And I think the high watermark at one point was 45% good news stories. If we all were working to really tout what we're doing, and there's so much good going on right now, whether it has to do with what's going on in traceability, whether it has to do with more sustainable fishing practices, fishery improvement projects, better things in terms of social responsibility. There's so many things going on. If we could get this all out there, and get the consumers educated, then when something like Seaspiracy comes out, then the consumers will have a broad enough understanding of the bigger picture issues. They'll say, well, wait a minute, that doesn't sound quite right. I mean, I've heard other things, and that doesn't jibe with what I've heard before. Yeah. So if we do our job every day, something like that isn't going to be as effective in terms of blindsiding. But when it comes out, you just let it come out. Don't put any more fuel to the fire. Just let it come, let it go.
Got it. All right, Patty, any other questions?
Yeah, we have a couple more. Everybody's pretty engaged today. If a company is involved in a Lacey Act violation, is there insurance to handle such claims?
Richard, I'm going to leave that to you.
You're giving that to me. I mean, I think that you're a better one to answer it.
That's a me question.
Yeah.
So look, part of our discussion that I had with Richard the other day, we touched on this a bit more, and it wasn't included in the recorded session. But when it comes to, criminal acts, which a Lacey Act violation, it falls into a criminal act category. if you're a seafood company that is knowingly engaging in a criminal act, there's no insurance that's going to protect you. So that's number one. But there are times when, let's say a importer here in the US can be caught up in a Lacey Act violation where, they were maybe provided fraudulent documents about product that they brought in. And they, that US importer may have paid for that product. That product is now confiscated. That product is potentially sold off by the US government. So that US importer is out money. Now, do these things happen frequently? They don't happen frequently. I think the first step in risk management is you try to address these issues through a lot of the stuff that you were talking about, Rich. You try to address the risks. You identify the risks, you mitigate the risks. You hopefully minimize the risk to such a low extent that it's not even worthy of premium dollars being spent to transfer that risk to an insurance company. But if there is a company who's concerned about Lacey Act violations, you kind of have to look at it two ways. Let me back up a step. Number one, you need to be dealing with a broker who understands this stuff. You need to be dealing with a broker who understands the seafood industry, what Lacey Act violations are, because it's up to that broker to kind of bridge the gap between insurer and insurance company. So that's number one. Number two, you got to think about the product exposure. Product can be confiscated. You have the replacement value of that product. There are policies that can be added onto marine cargo policies that include this Lacey Act coverage, but that is just for the value of the product. Beyond that, you can have legal expenses, and that is something that is typically, and again, it takes some maneuvering on behalf of the broker in designing the coverage properly, but I would say that would be something that would be addressed through directors and officers insurance. Attorneys have a way of kind of making these claims, or the government has a way of making these claims where it would trigger a properly designed directors and officers policy. So between the marine cargo policy with special endorsements and the directors and officers policy with special coverage enhancements, that is really how you would want to address this risk from an insurance perspective. But again, I still think focus needs to be on risk identification and risk treatment. And hopefully you can minimize the risk to a point where you don't even need the insurance. I know that's kind of a backwards thing for an insurance broker to say, but I know the seafood industry, very, very thin margins. Cost is very important to monitor costs. So if you don't have to throw premium dollars out the door, better to keep those premium dollars in your pocket.
But what I would say is that this is why it's really important to have an in-depth conversation with your insurance broker to understand what insurance products are out there, because some companies may not even know what the Lacey Act is. Yeah. And they may not understand what their exposure is. In a lot of this, where you're going to have the biggest problem is what you don't know. And the tools that are being developed in terms of blockchain traceability. And I know that you had Dana Bartholomew on an earlier episode, and I think that everybody should be looking at that. It was a great episode. So understanding how to get traceability in your system, understanding how to make sure there are no dark corners in your supply chain, it is one of the best ways to make sure that you never have to get a real answer to that question.
Well said. Patty, any other questions?
Yeah, we've got a couple more minutes. How much time do I have before I need to do all of this sustainability work? I think maybe people feeling a little bit overwhelmed by all this information and want to know what the timelines are.
Rich?
Yeah, the way that sounds, please don't take this the wrong way, but that sounds like the person who's looking at textbooks the Friday before the Monday of a college final exam and thinking that they need to open them all and start cramming it all into their head. And that's a problem. I mean, the best way to be looking at this is really kind of in little chunks. And I think that the answer is that if you do a little bit of something every day, then you're probably in a pretty good spot. So as I sort of said earlier when we were talking about how, my approach with this, identify first, look at the whole canvas. Identify where the areas are that are of importance to your company, to your customers, and that's in terms of risk and value systems. So sustainability, certainly. Legal compliance, absolutely. Social responsibility, incredibly important. Carbon footprint, you need to decide how you're going to be looking at that. It's a great thing because in many cases, when you're dealing with that, if you have less carbon footprint, it usually means you're using less fuel, which usually means you found a cheaper way to bring something to you. For example, bringing frozen seafood in instead of fresh is much cheaper, and it's a much more environmentally friendly way of doing it. So sometimes what you're doing is you're looking at progressive improvement, and sometimes it rewards you. So identify everything, then start to figure out which ones of these are more urgent, and start figuring out what is sort of like a low bar and then a higher bar, and work your way through. And then once you've got that worked out, delegate. Don't feel like you're the one person. And don't hire somebody to be the one person. Go to your company and see who's interested. I found that I had a couple people in my sales department who were really interested in things of sustainability. And if I just gave them a little bit of training and a little bit of latitude, they were able to bring ideas. They were able to do some work. They were able to help move us forward. So start slow, identify everything you want to work on, bring more people into the team. And then you should be on your way. But
now, Rich,
start today.
I guess part of this also comes down to, if you look at internal factors versus external factors, right? Internally, a company may say, this is the right thing for us to do, and we're going to do it, right? So, but if that's the only factor at play, you may have a little more time in order to accomplish that, right? Because there's no external factor forcing you. I think the other part of this, going back to our conversation, is identifying your customer base. And if you have customers who are requiring you to meet certain standards tomorrow, that may have to speed up the process. Don't you agree?
Not only just customers, absolutely. And absolutely start with your biggest customers and start with publicly traded customers. But you might even want to have a conversation with your bank, because larger customers have started to find that their bank is asking for their ESG, environmental social governance plan, as part of the documentation they want to see for renewal of lines of credit. And they're starting to require ESG metrics as part of what they expect from a company that they will lend money to.
So you're seeing this from typical lending institutions?
I'm seeing this from some of the brand names that you'll see in a retail store, the manufacturers who make the brand names. I know two of them who, when they went for their most recent renewal, they were told by their banks, and I'm not going to name either them or the bank, that they needed to have their ESG platform in place.
Wow.
for their renewal of their credit line.
Wow.
And again, I'm not saying that the ESG bar is extremely high right now, but the writing's on the wall. They're going to be expecting more and more in terms of compliance. And this isn't just in seafood. If you're looking at, I represented the seafood industry at the World Ocean Council's SOS, it was Save Our Seas conference in Paris in 2019. And there's something called the Poseidon Accords. And basically that's the major banks of the world who have put in place a requirement for shipping companies to have, I believe, a 35% reduction in carbon output by, I think it's the year 2035. And if they're not reducing their carbon output, and understand that's more dramatic than you might think, because since most of these companies are increasing the number of vessels they have, that's absolute. That's not an increase in efficiency. That's an absolute reduction. So these shipping companies will lose access to credit if they don't become more fuel efficient, if they don't reduce their carbon output. So this is a global phenomenon. Seafood actually is getting hit with some of this more slowly than other commodities, because we're just not as scaled up as some of these other industries. So it's coming. So customers, sure. Banks, you're going to see it, and the big guys, the publicly traded guys, are going to see it sooner than the smaller guys. Eventually, it's going to trickle down to anybody who aspires to sell any customer scale.
Got it. So we are at the hour. We are at the hour mark. So I know we may have some additional questions that have come through. To those who posed those questions and we were not able to answer them, just keep in mind that we always do follow-up articles to all of these discussions. And Rich, I'll reach out to you to maybe get your comments on some of these additional questions that came through. We'll include that in the follow-up articles to this conversation. But for now, thanks to all for joining and watching episode 9 of Food for Thought. Rich, thank you very much. Patty Devine, thank you for all your work. And again, Peter Handy at Bristol Seafood, thank you very much. For now, signing off, and we'll see everyone on the next episode of Food for Thought next month. Take care.
Thank you.